Are you ready to hear God's word? Amen. If you have the Bibles, please turn to Mark, Gospel of Mark. Last week, we finished chapter 4. And so for the next 7 weeks, during our Lent season, we're actually going to skip 10 chapters. Okay? We're going to skip 10 chapters, and we'll study chapters 14, 15, and 16 that talks about the death and resurrection of Jesus. And after we've done well, we will actually come back and finish from Mark chapter 5. And my brothers are doing the Lent season as we remember what Jesus has done for us as we go through this 6 weeks of studying about the death of Jesus and also on the resurrection. I pray that our hearts will be revived. Amen. Amen. So Mark chapter 14 will be verses 1 through 11. Okay. Last Sunday in our small group we were talking about art. Okay, how many artists do we have here? We have a few. Right, our brothers sung there. We have a famous artist in our small group, and he's our brother Sung here. Brother Sung, could you stand up? Yeah. All right, he's famous, and he's famous in our small group. That's what I meant, right? But all the kidding aside, actually, if you go to the Chicago Fashion Outlet, if you see this big whale there, and it's beautiful, it's actually he made it, and so, but I don't know how the conversation got there in our small group there, but because one of the things I was asking him, I'm amazed by how much people are willing to pay for art. Okay, it just boggles my mind. Now, I love art. I can appreciate art a little bit, and then so I can see people paying hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, right, or a few $1,000s. But it doesn't make sense to me that people would pay several $100,000 or even millions of dollars for a piece of art. And I can see beautiful art like our Joan Lucine. I know where she is. She did back there. If you go in our atrium, that's a beautiful art. Okay, and our Gail and Charlene and those other people, they do amazing work. But what amazes me, some of this art that I sold for hundreds and thousands of millions of dollars, I feel like my kids can do a better job from that. Okay? If you don't believe me, Google the most expensive art, auctioned art in last year. Okay, I Googled it. There's 20 different art that shows up that was sold for auction for the most expensive. Okay, first two, you shouldn't even look at it. All right, if you appreciate that kind of art, that first two, I would question your love for Jesus, right? And the next few ones, I'm like, I don't understand why somebody would pay. It just looks like kids were having fun putting all over the place, just paint all over the place. But it's sold for hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions of dollars. Obviously, I don't see the worth, but there are people who are willing to sacrifice millions of hard-earned money to be able to buy this art. And the reason I'm asking this question is because as we look in our passage today, the question that is raised for us in this passage is, how much is Jesus worth to you and me? That's a question that God wants us to ask in His Word today. How much is Jesus worth to you? Now, don't give a pat answer and say, hey, Jesus is all the world to me. Okay? We know that's the right answer. But if you look into your life, if you look during how you spend your life, your money, your resources, your thought, and all the things that consumes your life, and if somebody went around and looked at your life, how much would they say is Jesus worth to you? How much would you sacrifice for Jesus? How much would you take the cost or pay the cost to follow Jesus or to obey Jesus? How much resources, how much your effort, your time, your resources, your energy, your talent, do you think it's worth your devotion? That you say, hey, Jesus is worth, so I can give Him this much. How big is that? My brothers and sisters, we praise what we prize. You always praise what you prize. And you would not praise Jesus if you don't prize Jesus? Because even worship, we worship what we value. If you worship itself, it's worship. If you don't see the worth of Jesus, you will not truly worship him. If you don't see how much Jesus is worth, you will not sacrifice for him. Or you will do and say, oh, I can go this much, but this is too much for me. So the question for all of us is, how much is Jesus worth? And we're going to see a lady today. And she gave everything, and she said, Jesus is worth everything to me. But you will also see others who said, yeah, Jesus is worth, but not that much. So let's look at our passage, starting at verse 1. Okay. Mark chapter 14, starting verse 1. It says, it was now 2 days before the Passover and the feast of the unleavened bread, and the chief priest and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. For they said, not during the feast, lest there be uproar from the people. Now, even in the first few chapters and first 4 chapters that we looked, we saw the hatred that the religious people had for Jesus. Okay? Now this, as we'll see in the next 6 weeks, will be the climax of their hatred for Jesus, because they would want to kill him, and they do kill him. Okay. Now verse 3, and while he was at Bethany, and this is kind of flashback that Mark is giving us, and while he was at Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he was reclining at table, a woman came with an alabaster flask of ointment of pure nard, very costly, and she broke the flask and poured it over his head. So Jesus is at a place called Bethany, and he's having dinner with Simon the leper. Now he's a former leper. He's not a leper now, because if he was leper, nobody would come to his house. He will be an outcast outside. So we can assume, although Mark doesn't tell us, that Jesus healed him. So he's become a follower of Jesus. He throws a party, invites his friends, and invites the disciples. And he's having this party for Jesus. And it says, as Jesus was reclining and having a good time with his people, this woman comes, and Mark doesn't tell us who the woman is, but from John chapter 12, we know it's Mary, the sister of Lazarus. Okay. This lady comes in, and she brings this expensive perfume, which it says is pure nard. Now, nard was not something that you can buy at Walmart, right? It's not of the Axe body spray, but it's very cheap. You can buy as much. This is very, very expensive. Mark, it says that it was 300 denarii. That's a lot of money. If you go back to, I believe, to Mark chapter 6, where Jesus feeding the 5,000 that we will look later, it says, the disciple says, how do we feed this 5,000 men and women and children? It could be almost like 10, 15,000. And it's like, even 200 denarii is not enough. So 200 denarii could feed at least 5 to 10,000 people. So this 300 denarii is a lot of money. One denarius was about 1 day's wage. Okay? So 300 denarii, we can assume, is about a year's wage. Now in DuPage County, I looked it up, the average salary, median salary, is about $42,000. Okay? 40 to 42,000. So we can just assume this perfume of this nard is worth $40,000. No small chunk of change. Okay, whatever that perfume from India was, I've never seen that perfume in India, but apparently it was exported from India, right? And I didn't know India had such an expensive perfume, right? At least we know, I never saw it. But this was 40,000 imported perfume that this lady has, and it was very valued. Most probably, this was her savings. This was used for a time that, hey, something goes wrong. This was, like people save gold and other things. This was there, okay? And probably passed down as an inheritance. And to everyone's shock, she doesn't take a little dab of that and put it on the head of Jesus. She breaks this flask, and the flask itself was pretty expensive, okay? Because she knew that she won't needed it, and she pours this 40,000 worth of perfume or nard on Jesus' head and feet. You can understand a little dab, okay? We can understand that. But this lady takes this valued possession that she had, this perfume, and she pours it on the head of Jesus. Now, if you were watching this happen, what would your reaction be? Because this is not buying an expensive watch and that that would last, right? You can understand that. Hey, we gave a very expensive, he's going to die, but at least I gave him something expensive watch that would last. But this is, you just pour it and it's done. What would your reaction be? Would you go, what a waste? Or would you go, wow, that was beautiful? Let's see the reaction of the people, the disciples and the crowd that was around there. Verse 4. There were some who said to themselves indignantly, means mad and upset, this is crazy, right? They say, why was this ointment wasted like that? For this ointment could have been sold for more than 300 denarii and given to the poor. And they scolded her. People, and this is including the disciples, and the crowd, they looked at it and they said, lady, are you crazy? What did you just do? You poured this $40,000 perfume on Jesus. You were supposed to just take a little dab and put it on dishes. That would have been enough. What you're doing is crazy. What you're doing is excessive. And they said they were mad, they were upset, and they were scolding her. And what did they say? They're like, this $40,000 could have been used to feed the poor. I mean, don't you know we have so many poor people around us? I mean, what a waste. Now, we know that their concern for poor was not completely sincere. You know why? Because John tells us who's leading this charge of saying, hey, why did you do this? This is so expensive, you can give it to the poor. Does anybody know that? It was Judas. Judas is the one who was like, $40,000 you just wasted? And we know that Judas was actually stealing money, right? So they were not completely sincere in even saying this. You know what this interesting is? Other than Judas, most of this crowd here are pro-Jesus. Okay, that's why they're there. They're there to hear Jesus. They're there because they love Jesus. They're not like the religious leader that we saw in verse 1 and 2 who want to kill Jesus. They're not one of them. They are there hanging out with Jesus. They are disciples and they are fans of Jesus. Now, they're not upset that Mary did something nice for Jesus. Okay, that's good. But they think it's too excessive. I mean, you mind you doing nice things for Jesus, just put a little dab on him, pour a little bit on him. But this is too excessive. 40,000 worth. They were like, we love Jesus too. I mean, we love Jesus. That's why we are here. But we would not do something like that. That's crazy. That's over the top. That's a little fanatic. My brothers and sisters, this group is a pro-Jesus group. In some ways, even loves Jesus. But they don't think Jesus is worth this lavish treatment that he was receiving from Mary. They're pro-Jesus. They love Jesus. They're listening to Jesus. But they say, okay, we can go a little bit. But when they saw something, they started scolding because they were like, man, this is crazy. We don't understand this. My brothers and sisters, if you are honest, many of us would find ourselves in this crowd of people. Okay? The disciples and some of the crowd who were actually scolding Mary. We also love Jesus. We will also sacrifice for Jesus. We will also come and do to do a serving, but everything should be done in moderation. Moderation is a key word. Okay? It's not bad that you come and worship. Okay, you should worship, but when you see people around you who are like a little too crazy, it's like, why do you have to clap this much? Right? Just be nice, Christian. Just clap like that. When you raise your hand, you can go a little bit, but that's not me. I'm not criticizing. Some people we don't like doing it. That's not the point here. Okay? But they're saying, hey, we love Jesus too. We do, but this is excessive. This is too much. Worship, but worship in moderation. Give, but give in moderation. Okay? Serve, but serve in moderation. Just don't be a Jesus freak. It makes us look bad. think you just think a little weird. And you know, sometimes when we are in this group, as I said, you're annoyed by people who are Jesus free, even when you're a Christian. You're annoyed by somebody who's singing so loudly next to you. You're annoyed. It's like, man, that's too emotional. If you see somebody who serves a lot, you're like, either they have too much time on their hands or they're just showing it off. Because they can't be real. I mean, don't they have jobs? They don't have their family. It doesn't make sense to me why they would do that. Or if they give generously, they obviously don't have financial burdens like I do. My brothers and sisters, be careful when your heart goes in that direction. When you see somebody passionate for God, when you see somebody serving, and there's part of you feels kind of annoyed, the issue is more with you. I was listening when Pastor was saying that usually points not the deficiencies in the other person, but deficiency in your passion for Christ. And that's exactly what's going on here. They're not anti-Jesus, they are pro-Jesus, they also love Jesus. But it's like, just don't go crazy about Jesus. If you're in this camp, you want Jesus, you want your kids to love Jesus, to read their Bible, pray, go to Awana. But when you started seeing your kids getting too involved in missions, getting just crazy, it kind of worries you. You know why? Because like, man, I was hoping they would go to a medical school. What if they will go into a seminary or become a pastor or a missionary or something like that? Right? I want my kids to be good kids who love Jesus, but not overboard. Parents, you know what I'm talking about. If you are somebody who does love Jesus and you're passionate, and you face criticism, and you feel people judging your motives, don't be discouraged. Because for different reasons, people may misunderstand. And people misunderstood even right here. My brothers and sisters, if you are a passionate follower of Christ, sometimes even Christian, but especially the world, will not understand that. They will think that you're weird. You're thinking that she is weird. They're probably even making fun. I was like, whoa, what is going on? You're too spiritual. You know, one thing was shocking to me, even at a seminary, is how seminarians make fun of other seminarians who think they're too spiritual. I mean, you think you will get a prize there if you're too spiritual. The world will not understand why Christians would spend hours hearing somebody speak. Why they would come here and then listen to this Bible week after week and week. I mean, there's so much fun stuff to do outside. And then you serve, and there's this, and then you come back on Wednesdays. I mean, you guys don't have a life? I mean, giving 10% of your income? Are you guys crazy? Don't you know church is there to make your to get your money? If you don't compromise, and because of when you lose, God praise you. But think that you're foolish. My brothers and sisters, if you live for Christ, you will not always be a part. People can understand if you're passionate about sports, you're passionate about movie, you're passionate about something else, you're passionate even about poor. That's great. But when you're passionate about God,
truth is, you know what tomorrow
you will not always be applauded.
There's not a day
Because sometimes the world, not just that, the world will not understand. It's like me saying, why would somebody pay millions of dollars for this art? I don't get it. That's how the world sees it. It's like, I don't understand why you guys do all these things. You know, just imagine all the money that you give to church. If you had, what could you have done with it? Is it worth it? My brothers and sisters, the crowd, even the disciples thought she was excessive, but listen to the response of Jesus. Verse 6. But Jesus said, leave her alone. Leave her alone. And Jesus was not happy, mad, because seeing their reaction. Why do you trouble her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. Wow. Jesus has a totally different reaction than the disciples. He said, don't bother her, leave her alone. What she has done is not wasteful, but a beautiful thing. And I was thinking, only Jesus can say that. Only Jesus can look at 40,000 men just poured and say, hey, it's worth it. Just imagine if I did that. I mean, the elders during the service come up and say, they brought this $40,000 Rolex watch with diamond studded and everything, with a lot of bling in it. And they come up and say, hey, it's a hint. But if they come up and say, hey, we really appreciate your service to our church and stuff like that, here's this $40,000 worth of watch. We want you to feel loved. We want you to feel appreciated. Right? And some of in the congregations go, what? Did we just give him $40,000 a wallet with diamond and all this stuff? Shouldn't we have spent all that money on missions? And then I go, guys, don't be upset, just calm down. I'm totally worth it. I mean, what would you think? I hope you think we need to get rid of this guy. He's too full of himself, right? My brothers and sisters, only Jesus can say, because only Jesus is worth it. No human is worth it. Anybody else saying this is arrogant. Only Jesus can look at this and say, I'm worth it. And my brother says, why is that? Because he's God. He's the one who created the whole universe. He's the King of kings, the Lord of lords, who left his heavenly glory and came down and born as a virgin, born to a virgin mother. Okay? And lived this life, perfect life. And then he's going to die on the cross for our sin. And my brothers and sisters, I was even thinking that when Jesus was even dying on the cross, what's the smell that was on him? Even as he was persecuted, even as he was beaten. Because this smell was strong. Those Indian perfumes are strong. They don't go away, right? Even as he's dying on the cross, the smell, the perfume, the aroma was her sacrifice as she gave her best to Jesus. My brothers and sisters, the disciples didn't catch up to their confession. Even before, they saw everything. They saw who Jesus is. But when it came, later, after they saw the death and resurrection of Jesus, later they would change, right? They would give up everything, their very life for them. But at this point, this lady realized who Jesus is. And Jesus looks at her and says, you've done a beautiful thing, a glorious thing, a worthy thing. Verse 7, for you always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do good for them, but you will not always have me. She has done what she could. She has anointed my body beforehand for burial. Jesus is not saying, don't care for the poor, okay? If you take it as a verb, that's a total wrong application. The Bible talks a lot about taking care of the poor. Okay? But what Jesus was saying is the love for God trumps your love for other people, or even poor people. Okay? Worship comes first. Worship comes above. Your love for God should trump everything else in your life, even good causes. Okay? Jesus is saying, I'm not going to be here. I'm going to die. And she actually preparing my body for burial, because this was a common thing to do. After somebody died, you would put this perfume, okay, so the smell would stay good. And as people come for the funeral, it took a couple days. So she was preparing, because this is the only funeral rite that Jesus got. I mean, after Jesus was there, his disciples defected, they ran away. Jesus' body was literally thrown into the grave of this rich man. Okay? So she was preparing, and she said, she did what she could. My brothers and sisters, that's a good question for us. Would Jesus look at us and look at our lives and say, you know what? Sam did what he could. Or she did what she could. You know, God is not asking to give us, like what we don't have. Okay? But are you giving your best to Jesus? Or are you giving the leftovers of your life to Jesus? My brothers, we talked about, worship, as I said, is not just coming here and lifting hands in worship. That's the expression of worship. But worship is our lifestyle. Worship is putting God first. We can come here and sing as loud as we want, but then if our heart attitude in our lives is Jesus not the priority, it's not worship. Do you give Jesus the first in your life? Is he worth it in your life? Do you look at Jesus? Is he worth for you to get up 15 minutes in the morning and to pray? I was like, we all get up for work. Is he more valuable than our work? Is he more valuable than our children? Is he more valuable than our money? Is he worth it? Is he worthy of your worship? We can all say in our head, yeah, he is. But does that work out in our everyday life? And my brothers and sisters, what Jesus didn't care about that perfume, right? I mean, God who created the whole universe, you think he cared about her $40,000 perfume? I mean, you could invite the billions of angels to come. God didn't need that. But my brothers and sisters, what God cared about is her heart. And God is delight when he sees his people who are fully devoted to him. Look at the commendation in verse 9. And I truly say to you, wherever the gospel is proclaimed in the whole world, what she has done will be told in memory of her. Jesus said, hey, he didn't say, go and tell everybody that I walked on the water, that I healed and do it. None of that. Didn't say specifically mention any of that. She's like, go. Wherever the gospel is proclaimed, make sure in the whole world what she has done will be told in memory of her. That's huge. Jesus himself saying that. I want people from generations, wherever the gospel is going in the whole world, this to know. And my brothers and sisters, today is also fulfillment of what Jesus said that, as you hear what this lady has done. Jesus said, you thought that she was wasteful? She was foolish? She could have used that for better? What she's done is beautiful. And this is what I desire. My brothers and sisters, when we get to heaven, some of the most foolish people that we think today will be the most celebrated. Tables will be turned. People who are celebrated here would not be celebrated in heaven. People that we feel pity on, people will feel like, man, you got better things. You don't have better things to do with your life? Why would you go as a missionary to this place? When my parents went to Bihar, the place where I grew up as a missionary, people said, what are you guys doing? At least for the sake of your children, don't go there. I mean, go to a better place. Don't go there. At least for your sake of your children. You don't want to go for them to grow up as a villager? Totally uncultured? Serve Jesus, but go to a place where they will have good school. Go to a place where they will have this. My brothers and sisters, it's easy for us to say, just to say worship. But my brothers and sisters, one day when we stand before God, God doesn't care about our accomplishments. God doesn't care about our thing. What God cares is your devotion to him. And this teaches us that a passionate personal devotion to Jesus delights his heart. And ultimately, that's all he wants from his people. My brothers, in contrast to this wonderful lady is the next passage, is Judas. Look at verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, who was one of the 12, went to the chief priests in order to betray him to them. And when they heard it, they were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought an opportunity to betray him. There's so much I can talk. We can do a whole sermon on this. But I want you to draw your attention to one phrase at the end of verse 10. He said, he went to the chief priest in order to betray him to them. What a sad and foolish choice. Isn't it? I mean, we can look back and say, Judas, what were you thinking? You betrayed the Son of God. You will stand before him in all glory one day. You will see him. And you betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver for a few $1,000s? Think about it, this guy. He spent 3 years with Jesus. I mean, you talk about, some people are like, man, I wish I had a better preacher. I mean, who could get a better preacher than Jesus himself? All right, discipleship. I mean, could you get a better discipleship than discipled by Jesus? I mean, he had all the advantages that anybody could have. And yet he was so drawn to the worldly things that he betrayed Jesus. My brothers and sisters, we can look at Judas and say, what a foolish choice. And yet, we make this trade all the time. We sell Jesus for 30 minutes of porn, 30 minutes of adulterous affair or sex. For momentary pleasure, we betray Jesus. We betray Jesus to get through the approval of our neighbors, of our friends. Because you feel the pressure. I want them to like me. I don't want them to think that I'm, some of the religious freak. And during those moments, you keep your mouth shut. You go to a certain party that, hey, you're a believer there. God has placed you. But you feel the peer pressure. What would people say? They will think I'm weird. We sell Jesus for more money or to save some money. We sell Jesus to be liked by a certain group. We sell Jesus for a business deal. We sell Jesus to get a promotion. My brothers and sisters, nothing that you trade with Jesus, I can guarantee you, will be ever worth it. Ever. It doesn't matter what the cost is. And there will be a cost. You face not only little decisions, but you will face big decisions. When following Jesus may cost you your job. Because you can't do certain things. So this is not like, okay, I lose $10 a year. This is huge. And Judas, my brothers and sisters, is an example of a person who finds God useful, not beautiful. Judas, although he was with Jesus, he never realized Jesus is the Son of God. He never did. You won't see Judas in heaven. He thought Jesus was useful. As long as there was crowd, there's people coming, this is great, I love it. But the moment things started going down, he saw Jesus, that the religious leaders are going to take him down. He said, okay, I leave Jesus, let me get a bandwagon. And he betrayed Jesus for 30 silver, for a few $1,000s. And the question for you, my brothers and sisters, do you find Jesus useful or you're beautiful? The lady found Jesus beautiful. If you find something beautiful, you will say, hey, and worthy, it's like, there's nothing too much. She never regretted, my brother. So when you see her in heaven, it's like, hey, she's like, this is what, I never lost anything. This was totally worth it. But if you find Jesus useful, you will only go a certain. And at a certain point say, you know what? When I weigh Jesus with this laws that I'm going to think, I don't know if Jesus is worth it. In a few minutes, let me end with 2 quick applications. First, this passage is telling us rightly to assess the worth of Jesus. How much is Jesus worth to you? My brothers and sisters, our actions flow from our affections. Okay? Your actions flow from our affections. You know, what we are trying to do here, even as a church, is not to change people's behavior. Okay? Because people's behavior would only, if you're trying to change your behavior, it will only go so much. After that, you will go right back to it, right? But when your affections are changed, when your heart is changed, the behavior automatically changes. When you value something, it changes your heart. You know, we try to change our children's behavior, right? I mean, they might be good kids for some time, but not for too long. What we need is their heart to be changed and their affections to be changed. If you're here, my brother and sister, and you're not a Christian, I want you to know that Jesus is the point of everything we do here. We are not here because just it's good to have a social group. We are not here to fundraise. We are not here just because it's just good time and, singing and all these things. We are here, my brothers and sisters. We sing and we worship and we give and we serve because we believe Jesus is worth it. Everything else would fade away, but Jesus will remain. If you're a believer, don't lose your first love. Okay? It's so easy to have that. When you're a Christian, yes, passion, but over time, other things starts competing. And Jesus goes on your priority level at the bottom or somewhere here. Second application, your wholehearted worship of Jesus is beautiful and not wasteful. My brothers and sisters, Jesus notes all your acts of devotion. Not even one of them, I can guarantee you, will go unnoticed. Not even one of them. Your financial offerings is not a waste of money. Your hospitality is not a waste of money. The time that you spend praying for others is not a waste of your time. When you serve, it's not a waste of your time. And Jesus assures you, like this woman, God delights in it. The one who gave himself as a sacrifice for us, there's nothing too much for him. I think Mary would have loved this Isaac Watson song, the old hymn, The Wonderful Cross, which says, were the whole realm of nature mine, if I had the whole world to myself, if I owned the whole world, that were a present far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. And the question, my brothers and sisters, is he worthy? And the question is, do you see his worth? Do you identify with this lady? Or do we identify with Judas or with the crowd? As we close our eyes, I want you to ask yourself this question. I want all of you to close your eyes, my brothers and sisters. How much is Jesus worth to you?